Every summer in our pediatric practice, we are invariably asked about vaccine schedules, vaccine exemptions, and what parents' rights are relative to schools. Now, exemptions do vary from state to state, but I'm going to share what I know about exemptions overall, scheduling, etc. But also, I'm going to go into the details of the Florida law because that's where I am really an expert. So let's talk about it. Hey everybody, it's Dr. David. So, as a pediatrician for 25 years here in the state of Florida, but also somebody who has been looking at the vaccine story throughout the country, as we've seen certain states such as California and New York change around what they're allowing or not allowing in terms of exemption. So, I feel like I have a pretty good lay of the land what's out there. Now, people do consult with me out around the country when it comes to vaccine schedules, helping people understand what their state laws are. Being both the son of and brother of an attorney, I have a little bit of understanding of like reading through laws and stuff like that. So I'm pretty good at helping people suss that all out. Now, also, of course, I'm involved in lots of areas when it comes to health and education overall. So again, this is really where I do spend a good amount of my thought, but also a good amount of my time when I am talking to families in the clinic. Now, um, first of all, as you may know, I do have a very unique approach and philosophy when it comes to both medical and educational choice. Okay, and I do defend every family's right to determine how they wish to proceed, whether it comes to, and this is true not just for vaccine rights, but also, as I've talked openly and freely about, regarding reproductive rights, regarding gender identity, school choice. All of these are things that each person, each family has to make a decision for themselves as to what's best for them and their family. Now, of course, most people have very strong views about all of these types of topics. Okay. And I really wish that people would just be more respectful of what another person's take is on it and what they want to do. Just like I would hope that you would want to have your decisions, your thoughts respected as well. So again, if we can all use a little step back and realize, hey, I want to be able to make my own decisions, but do I really have a right to put that much of an input into somebody else's decisions? Okay. Now, of course, with vaccine rights, it is a bit of a difference in that all of those other things that I was referring to is mostly just impacting the person themselves, right? And and so how what is, but of course, with vaccines, there is a bit of a difference that we all need to be mindful of because of contagiousness, right? So most of the diseases that are vaccinated against are contagious, are infectious. Now, of course, there's lots of conversations to say, well, how likely is it as a person to catch the infection? Obviously, things like tetanus is not even contagious at all, yet it's part of the school schedule. But we're not going to be really getting into the pros and the cons of the individual vaccines today. We're more just talking about what people's rights are. Okay. Now, as far as the information, it's also clear I am not endorsing any particular plan that a family wishes to do that I hear about. I am helping families understand what's going on, and if there are people who want to put vaccine schedules together, of course I'm very happy to help them accomplish that as well. But I do feel it is the parents' both right as well as responsibility to do their homework, to do their research, to look at reliable sources, talk to their medical professional. Now, I realize that that's a bit of a challenge because in a lot of medical practices, if you don't follow exactly their way of thinking, the CDC schedule, that you get the boot. And I realize that that's a big challenge, and I realize that's kind of why a lot of people do come to our practice is because of the fact that we respect those individual choices and help them accomplish their goals. Okay, now as far as this go, we want to make sure whenever we are doing a vaccine consultation in our practice that it's open, it's non-confrontational. I'm doing more listening than they are because I want to know what it is that they want. Okay, and in our practice, parents can certainly choose to do all of the vaccines, but they can also choose to do some or none. They can do them on time according to the CDC schedule. They can do them split, or they can choose to delay. I will work with them. That's the state of Florida allows me to do that. Okay, and so so I think that's just also really important, having somebody who you can talk to that's being open-minded and can help give you the guidance that you need. And as I tell parents, a decision made today is not a decision that has to be set in stone, of course, unless you give a vaccine to somebody because you can't suck it out of their body once it's been there. But I've certainly had people who come to the office who say, hey, my kid's got a cold today, I don't want to give a vaccine today. Okay. Or what, I've decided that I'm not comfortable giving that vaccine at all. Again, okay, we'll bring it up again. But again, I want people to feel comfortable about this, not that they feel worried that it's going to be an antagonistic situation. Okay, now in terms of the school vaccine exemptions themselves, as I said, it does vary from state to state, although there is some aspect on the federal relative to the CDC. And in particular, it is important to note there is no medical exemption that carte blanche would exempt an individual student from all vaccines. I know people talk about certain types of cancers, immunodeficiencies, but if you look at the package insert, it's not all are complete or would be exempt just because of that diagnosis. Okay, I know people have asked me about that. I've seen other doctors do that, but in my practice, I know that that is the reality. And even if somebody had it, had all exemption because of a medical decision, I won't grant it to them because I've also, one of the things is I've been in frequent contact with the health department here in Hillsborough County. They are aware of everything that I'm doing. I run it all by them to make sure that I'm not running afoul of law. I certainly am not going to jeopardize my medical license. And so, everything that I'm saying to you is also stuff that's been vetted by our health department, who, of course, is the one who is the overseer county by county of the schools, the schools vaccine records that has to be on file for every child. Now, in terms of the diagnoses that are exemptable, okay, every single vaccine has a package insert. You can look it up online as well. Okay, in addition, every time that a child is supposed to get a vaccine, the family is supposed to be given a vaccine information sheet, or a VIS, that details the risks and the benefits, the potential side effects, the contraindications as well. And that, again, is supposed to be given each time for each vaccine. So you're supposed to be presented that. I've sometimes seen that doesn't happen, but that certainly should be the policy because that is actually what the law says. Okay, now, one thing, though, that, is clear for all of them. If you've had a negative reaction, if there was a significant reaction to a vaccine, don't give it again. Now, I want to clarify that, okay? Some people say, well, my kid got a fever. Oh, my kid was off for a day. Oh, had some local swelling. That in and of itself actually doesn't concern me. A fever is part of the immune response. So it's mounting a fever when you're trying to elicit immune response, which is what a vaccine does. Okay, that's the body doing what it's supposed to do. Okay, and of course, injecting anything into somebody can get a little local redness and swelling. That shouldn't be the whole leg, shouldn't be red and swollen. But if there's a small circle, again, that doesn't bother me. And again, when the immunological system, the cytokines are all kicking in, you can feel off for a day or two. So, of course, I'm much more concerned about anaphylactic types of reactions or more serious reactions, very high spiking fevers, a seizure or something else like that. Then that, of course, would be much more of a concern. Now, of course, they always say, if they say, not just if you've had a reaction to that vaccine or one of its components, but here's what the challenge is, because now there are vaccines that there's in one injection, there's actually 3 different vaccines, like the DT8, the DTP8P, the polio, and the hepatitis B, or those, and Haemophilus influenza B. And there are also, of course, depending on the age, at age 4 months of age, a child could get 6 different vaccines if by following the CDC schedule. And it's feasible that a child could get even 9 vaccines at 15 months old, if depending on how the schedule falls and what the doctor orders. And of course, how do you know which of those things that a person had a negative reaction to if all are given at once? To me, that's why I think there is some logic to splitting them up one at a time to see if there's a negative reaction. We tell people to do that with baby food, right? We say, wait 3 days, wait 4 days before another food is introduced. So if there's a negative reaction, but it's kind of like if you do peas, you're fine. A few days later, you do carrots, you're fine. Then a few days later, you can do peas and carrots. But if you start peas and carrots and there's a reaction, you don't know what it's to. And that is one of the challenges that we have with multiple vaccines being given on the same day. That's just the reality of it. Every doctor obviously has to deal with that because that's what the CDC schedule says. Now, in terms of philosophical and religious exemptions, so again, each state has its own laws. Some states will have philosophical exemptions, and some won't. Now, a couple aren't even accepting religious exemptions that we kind of talked about as for. But I put in the show notes, in the description right down below, a link from the National Vaccine Information Center. Has a really wonderful, it's a link that shows a map, and you can click on every single state, and it'll tell you exactly what their rules are, what their laws are. So you can really see right then and there what it is for your individual state. Okay, so thank you for NVIC for having that list available for people to understand what the rights are. Okay, I've seen other websites, if you look at it, where it'll just say, these states have the religious, these have the medical, but you kind of have to know the details of it. Is there a particular form that needs to be filled out? Is there an attestation that needs to be made? Does it need to be with a doctor, not with a doctor, etc.? So again, you have to know what those specific details are for the exemptions, and that's why this can be such a helpful website. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about Florida. I know that there are a lot of states. I know Texas is very similar to ours. I think Georgia is too, but every state is different. So still look it up if you're not in Florida. Okay. Now, in Florida, we do not have a philosophical exemption. A philosophical exemption is simply saying I'm philosophically opposed. No more, no less. That's all it is. And in states who have that, that's the end of it. Again, what form to fill out. But although there's no philosophical exemption here in Florida, we do have a religious exemption. And this is something that was affirmed in 1999 by the Florida Supreme Court. Okay. Now, health, and what they said is that health department officials, so every county in Florida has a health department where there's a vaccine station, and that's where a parent can go to claim a religious exemption. And the health departments, the Supreme Court said they're not allowed to ask you anything about a person's religion. They actually said it would be a violation of the separation of church and state in terms of that constitutional aspect. So they'd be separate, they constitutionally violated if they're asking you that question. In all honesty, I've only heard of a couple times that that's happened. Most of the times people have said they were much nicer at the health department than they thought it would be. And actually, the main time that I recall, there was actually a substitute nurse there who, thankfully, the parent knew what their rights were. And when they started asking questions to prove their religiousness, the mom asked to see the supervisor, and the supervisor very quickly said, "You're to the employee, she's right, you're wrong, give her the vaccine exemption." And that was the end of it. But there's no proving of clerginess. You don't have to letter from a clergy. You don't have to take a religious test or anything like that here in the state of Florida. It's just simply saying I am attesting that I'm religiously opposed. Okay. Now, as far as the schools, all Florida public schools must accept the religious exemption. It's a form called the DH-681. Okay. Now, in terms of Florida private schools, it was always that they had to as well. Now, about a decade ago, the Catholic Diocese of St. Petersburg declared that they weren't going to accept it anymore because there's nothing in the Catholic religious doctrine that talks about being religiously opposed, that so it's not part of their religion. And this actually went to court. The family sued them. In my opinion, their attorney made some really terrible arguments, and they ended up losing the case. And so precedent was set for other religious schools to do that. And there are some that do, although most of the religious schools still accept the religious exemption. There are now even some private non-religious schools who are now starting to do this as terms of not accepting it as well. And let's face it, does anybody want to sue the place that they're going to send their kid to school? That's kind of a bad, getting off on a wrong foot. So most of the families will either comply with the vaccine and do the schedules, or they will go find another school. Now, it is important to understand that the way that the law is written is that until a child is completely up to date, including boosters, they're actually given a temporary medical exemption up until when the next vaccine is supposed to be given. But the Florida law also does say that I am attesting, so this is the medical exemptions with the doctor's right, I am attesting that this patient has commenced a schedule to complete. Okay, so that means start. So in our practice, as long as the patient has started and has a schedule to complete all of the vaccines, and we have it documented, then I'm comfortable giving that form out because they're doing what the state says. And again, that may be very different in other states. Okay. Now, of course, it is important for people to realize that, those students in Florida who are homeschooled, that the the vaccine mandate is not part of homeschooling. So homeschoolers don't need to have an exemption because they're not required to submit the forms in the first place. Okay, that was a lot. Now, I, of course, hope that this helps parents get a deeper understanding of what their rights are. Of course, I also hope that a family can find a medical home, a medical practice, a pediatric family care practice that will respect their rights and will work with the family based upon what there are. Of course, I realize there's not. That's why there's practices like ours around. But also, if anybody does need any additional help trying to navigate their way through this, of course, as part of Dr. David, MD, and the health education choice aspect of what we do, I do educational consultations for anybody who wants to get more information. Have a nice day.